Good afternoon, everybody. We're back with another episode of Wrench Tales. This is episode number 6. I'm Brandon Steckler, Technical Editor, Motor Age Magazine, and I'm here with my longtime good friend Chris Martino of ADAS LI in Long Island, New York. Chris, how you doing, my friend?
Long Island. How's it
Long
going,
Island.
Brandon?
Yeah, LON, new word, GISLAND, Long Island.
Long Island. That's how you know you're from here.
That's how you know you're from the East, right? Can't say it right. Anyhow, welcome back, my friend. I love you, buddy. I'm glad you're here. It's good to see you. Happy 4th, by the way.
Happy 4th, Brandon.
Time flies when you're having fun, right?
All
So,
kinds of fun.
so as always, every time you call me, it's never good news. And let me explain. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, there's certain people in my network that reach out to me and I love to hear from them. But I know when I do, if they're asking for any input, I got to roll up my sleeves and dig down deep because this is not going to be easy. After a certain amount of years of doing things, there are certain things you learn to avoid. And what I mean is, anytime I get a phone call from close friends like Chris here, I know I'm in for you know, for the long haul. Chris was faced recently with a vehicle, of all things, a big, ugly, greasy Dodge diesel truck,
Yes.
with some strange communication issues. Now, I got to tell you, Chris was called in initially. Chris runs a very prominent, successful programming and ADAS calibration business, fairly new, but fairly successful. He's top notch when it comes to diagnostics and programming. And he was called out to his shop, you know, for business as usual. Put on the programmer hat, show up and come program this module because we, as the hosting shop, don't have the proper equipment or the time to learn how to do it. Can you come do this for us? We'll pay you. Well, that's what he did. But when he showed up, he was not able to do that. I'm going to let you take it away from here, my friend. Please.
Oh, well, thank you, Brandon. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. This one was a fun one. I did like what we find. So, this subject vehicle is a big old dirty Dodge 2500 diesel. That is not the vehicle in question. The vehicle in question was this big, greasy, gross, lifted brodozer, if you will.
Bro,
It's a brodozer.
where do you get this stuff?
That's what they call them. Big, huge, giant wheels, grease everywhere. The lift kit, it was like a 3 link in the front. It was ridiculous. But the truck did not run. And the shop decided it was a diesel shop that I have a physical location along with being mobile. And the shop 2 buildings down is a diesel specialty shop. And he walked on over and said, "Hey, can you guys come program this Dodge for me?" Sure, not a problem. My guy goes down there with WiTech and goes to figure out what it is. And they said, "Well, we put a TIPM in the car. Can you program it?" I said, "Sure, no problem." The car didn't crank, didn't do anything. You turned the key, nothing happened. It saw that there was a key there, but nothing happened. Um, he went there to go program the TIPM and couldn't talk, couldn't do anything. So what he did notice is that the entire network was down. And what does that mean? Right? So when you start with a diagnosis, I always start with a code scan. I have a background in remote diagnostics, and I have learned over the years that let the entire vehicle tell you the story. Basically,
Agreed. 100%.
one of the first things you learn in being a diagnostician is don't just go to the one module that's faulting. You want to actually let the car tell you the story. So we start with a full car code scan, and we see that I see nothing but no comps. All
Can,
right.
can I throw something in there real quick?
Yes, you can.
Just for a moment. When you mentioned checking other nodes, I'm going to give you guys the perfect example of that if you couldn't visualize it already. You've got a car where the air conditioning doesn't work for some reason. But after scanning the car, you find out that the battery charge system, the battery or charging system maintenance system indicates an issue, with battery current or perhaps the alternator isn't working right. It's not uncommon for vehicles to perform a load shedding technique where they get rid of, non crucial or system crucial activities like AC compressor control. If we turn that off, that's less current for the alternator. So, I mean, just things like that. If you did not do an all DTC scan like Chris recommended, you could be chasing, an air conditioning problem that's really not a problem at all. The computer's just not turning it on because of an underlying cause. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, Chris, but I
No,
just want people to
that's actually a
understand.
good point. Also, if you get a car that has a fresh battery in it, that somebody or a previous shop or somebody put a fresh battery in it and the AC doesn't work, stuff like that. Again, do a code scan because a lot of the times that battery has to be adapted to tell the car has a brand new battery to turn all that stuff back on. But
Hmm.
that was a great detour.
Sorry, go ahead.
Um, no, it's okay. Um, so what I start with is an entire code scan, right? And again, you can see if you go back to the that slide that you had there. Um,
Oops, wrong way. I'm sorry.
wrong way. Let's go. There we go. You see, it's just no comms everywhere. All right. I didn't include everything because it was everything was no comms. All right. So it makes sense that I can't program to stuff I can't communicate, and if I don't have a complete network, I can't program to it anyway. What really makes WiTech really good, and they're one of the first OE manufacturers to do this, is they give you this network layout, which is pretty awesome. Now, what they do is they give you what the network would look like in a graphical mode. This isn't you can't totally base everything on this. What it does generally do is take your different networks and lay them out graphically. And what you can see here is all those red modules. Those are all modules, right, connected to the TIPM over there, right? The red means no communication, right? In WiTech, red means the module should be there and it should be communicating, but it's not, right?
So
So we have an issue. We have an issue here.
So for
And
those of you that aren't familiar, this is a Chrysler or FCA factory scan tool called WiTech. And what you can't see on this because we just simply cut it off so it fits. They offer color codes, and just for instance, green means good, meaning not only is the node available on the vehicle, but green means it's communicating. In this case, red means it's available, but it's not communicating.
Mhm.
Um, Other things like you'd see a lightning bolt that could indicate software
Yeah,
update is
flash is up.
available for that
Flash
node.
is
But
available. Yep.
yeah, but what I love Chris is pointing out here is basically like flying up in the sky, seeing a huge lay of the land. We can see how the vehicle's network is configured. So, like to recap what Chris was saying, this is not a wiring diagram. This is not the be all end all. This is how this vehicle was physically structured. And there's a lot of clues that Chris is going to point out here, right from the
Exactly.
driver's seat.
Exactly. So what I see things FDCM, PCM, ABS, TPM, that's tire pressure model, DTCM, drivetrain, ITBM is the integrated trailer brake, WDCM, SAS, steering angle sensor. Those are things that are all, again, rule of thumb, are on a high speed network. Chrysler calls the high speed network CAN-C. Every manufacturer calls their networks different. Chrysler generally calls it CAN-C. So I can see again, not by doing anything yet, that my CAN-C network seems to be down, right? And all my faults seem to be related to everything on that network,
Can I
right?
point out something else out here? It's an
Yes, you
important
can.
clue. You mentioned TIPM, which we know that we're familiar is totally integrated power module. Serves as basically a fuse box with some communication and logic in it. But
Mhm.
these last three letters here,
There you
CGW.
go. TIPM, Central Gateway. So
So
that gives us another couple clues. So totally integrated power module, Central Gateway. And we're going to come back to that a little bit later. So what I want to do now is I want to know, like, again, this is good, but you can't be beholden to it. So now that I know what I appear to have a network problem, I want to see how this network is really laid out with a real wiring diagram. And if we move to the next slide, you can see that this is our CAN-C bus system. Now, taking a note, this vehicle is a diesel. So you see where the arrow is circling, all right? Those are the ones that apply, all right? So um, if you look right here, that's my powertrain control module and my drivetrain control module, all right? So the modules on the left of that, outside of the box, don't apply to this vehicle. So we don't have to worry about those, all right? So I see that, and then everything to the right is part of this network. So all my issues are here. So now that I see that this is my entire CAN-C network, right? I want to see what this is. Now, I'm starting out very basic here, right? And like we've all, I'm sure a lot of us have taken basic network diagnostic classes. We've read on them. Brandon, I'm sure you've taken them. I'm sure you've taught some of them, right? And what do they generally teach you? Step one in a network diagnostic class. What do they want you to do? If you
Many
confirm
of
there is a
those
network problem.
many of those classes want you to first establish whether or not there's integrity within the system. What I mean is, do the roads connect? So we would prove that by looking at network resistance values.
There you go. And network resistance values. And again, high-speed CAN bus is a general communication protocol, and the basic rules apply for all manufacturers. And what you're looking for is you're looking for 60 ohms of total resistance in your network, and that's accomplished by two 120 ohm resistors, generally at either end of the network, right? And you access that most of every class that you'll take, it'll want you to go to pin 6 and 14 at the data link connector, right, Brandon?
Yeah.
All right.
And
So we look at pin 6 and 14 on this diagram, and what do we see?
which is right here, but now we're
Yep.
going to zoom in.
Yep. So we see pin 6 and 14 is called diagnostic CAN, right? See, it's diagnostic CAN C. So that tells me CAN C is high speed CAN, but this is diagnostic CAN. Now, diagnostic CAN is not regular CAN. What that kind of means is that is what connects to your scan tool. So you usually see that in a gateway vehicle. And this TIPM, we talked about that, is a TIPM slash CGW, central gateway.
Yeah.
So if I hook
And
up with the 6 and 14, go on, Brandon, what are you going to say something?
I was just going to say what you're about to. When we connect our scan tool right here at our DLC, what we used to see prior to gateway existence, we used to have direct communication with the computers,
Yep.
the other nodes on a network. But now what happens is, what Chris is telling you is that no longer occurs, especially in a vehicle like this. This tip I'm serving as the CGW, or central gateway. The scan tool talks to the gateway in a language. However, the computers, the rest of the nodes on the vehicle, talk to the other side of the gateway in a different language. So the gateway
Exactly.
itself might be speaking, Chinese, Mandarin, and Greek. It speaks
Mhm.
one language, and then it regurgitates that information in another, and we can't take that for granted. And that's
Well,
where
in this
wiring
in
does.
this case, since Can was invaded by Bosch, the gateway speaking German, and because these Dodges are made in Mexico, everything's speaking Spanish. That's basically how it's going. But
Kidding, of
so,
course.
but again, a couple things of note because high speed CAN or CAN C is a protocol. All right, the same basic rules are going to apply. You're gonna if you measure 6 and 14 with your ohm meter with the key out of the car and the network asleep, you're going to get your 60 ohms, right? And if you measure voltage, you're going to get your 2.5 with a meter, or you'll get your general looking scope patterns. But you're not getting in the network. You're getting what the gateway tells you should be there. All that being said, we need to get into the module. Another clue is if you zoom back out to the next diagram, you'll see that let's go to the previous slide. There you go. You'll see that the diagnostic CAN wire colors are a different wire color than the rest of them, and that's another clue that you're going to be speaking through a gateway. I found looking at most vehicles, all your CAN wires of a certain CAN protocol are going to be the same color. And I can see that my diagnostic CAN or my gateway wire or my data link connector wires are a different color. I need to be looking elsewhere to connect to the system. All right. So if I see, again, this being a giant, gross, disgusting, greasy diesel, I don't want to be rooting around in the engine compartment if I don't have to be. All right. But I do see on the far right hand side of this diagram, I can see that I have my wind module. I have my
Perfect.
steering control module and my wind module, right? And those are generally by the steering column area, right? And I can access those generally. And if you look, you see there's a splice there, right over there, splice number 286. Now, if I go to a location diagram of splice 286,
266?
266. I'm sorry, I can't read.
That's okay. No
Um,
worries.
if I can go to splice 266, that's where it lives, right
Hey,
there.
I love how you leverage this, dude. You know, this is I know Chris doesn't he's speaking right over this because this is just business as usual for him, but how powerful the takeaway should be from this. Chris isn't really, I'll use the word working on the vehicle yet. He's gathering his thoughts, he's gathering his game plan, his information. He's deciding where he wants to execute this testing. And you heard him say it. All these networks, excuse me, both of these two, the wireless and the steering angle sensor are located right in basically a same general vicinity. And it's
Mhm.
easy to access. He's not putting the vehicle up in the air or he's not hanging upside down in the engine compartment. He's at an accessible location. So there's more than one way to skin a cat, but Chris's approach, like all of us who make money as diagnosticians, accuracy is one thing, but being efficient is another. He's
Exactly.
accessing an easy to gain place. Sorry.
Exactly. So I see that it's right here, accessible. If I just pull that bottom cover under the steering column down, no screws, just pop it right down. And if I get to that piece of wiring harness, I cut the tape open a little bit, and I'm looking for my white and green, white and blue wires. That's all I'm looking for, right? I'm just looking for wires that look like that. And again, basic CAN bus stuff, they're twisted together. So I'm looking for a pair of twisted wires with white and green, white and blue, pulling them out. And because I want to access the network, I want to um, I want to get into there. And again, we're still doing our first test if we're looking for 60 ohms of total resistance. So I find my white and green, white and blue wires. I come out, I pierce into them with piercing probes, which I will then use the nail polish over them when I'm done. And I find, so if I go into the network, right, key out of the vehicle, right, I'm expecting to see 60 ohms, right, because that's usually the law of high speed CAN, right, Brandon?
Yeah,
Yep.
that's what I
So
would expect.
I'm looking to see 60 ohms. And again, you don't want to do a test without knowing what you should expect. So I'm looking for 60 ohms. All right. I see 120 ohms at that
So
network. Go on.
before, just to make sure I don't lose you here. So we've identified, and guys, you know, we've written over this simply because we know this is hard to see. Capturing this information off a computer screen and uploading it so we can zoom in on it, things get a little bit fuzzy, and I apologize for that. But that's the reason for the acronyms that we've drawn on here, just to make them easier to see. But Chris, again, doing through his research, he's located these components. He's isolated a network so he can do his testing and he's at his connectors located at the TIPM. So what we're finding up here, this is Chris is leveraging the power service information.
Mhm.
In this case, what were you using? All data, you said?
Yeah, right here, it was an all data diagram. I went and used all data, and I like to do. They have the non OE diagrams, but for stuff like this, I like to be as accurate as possible, especially when I'm looking to condemn something really expensive or get into doing a lot of labor. I like to have an OE diagram. You have to be careful though, because especially with like European vehicles, they have all kinds of different options, and you got to make sure that your diagram is correct. I did verify this with factory service information. It is the correct diagram. When I went to go put all this together, I didn't have to buy a sub because I knew the all data diagram was perfect and was right there. But what I did see is I saw 120 ohms of total resistance in the network. You got to go back like 4 slides. So I saw 120 ohms at this connector with everything connected and the key out of the car.
Which connector, buddy? I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. No connector. I was actually pierced into the splice connect, the splice itself. I was physically pierced into the wires at the at that splice, and I saw 120 ohms, which tells us what exactly.
Well, typically that would tell me 120 ohms if we have two resistors, as we should,
Mm-hmm.
spliced within the circuit in parallel, laid out in a parallel configuration. That would yield us 60 ohms of total circuit resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Two 120 ohm resistor circuits in parallel should yield us
Mm-hmm.
60 ohms. That's just math.
Exactly. So when I connect there, again, I'm expecting to see 60 ohms because that's good. But 120 ohms means I'm missing a resistor somewhere or my network is incomplete somewhere. So then I go back to a wiring diagram and I want to look at the TIPM that they just replaced. Let's go forward one more slide. There you go. And I could see from here that my network is actually able to be split into two different sections at these two different connectors. It's a little fuzzy, but you can see connector 7 at the TIPM and connector 1 at the TIPM right here. So that actually makes it a lot easier to check because, again, rule of thumb on these type of systems are your terminating resistors are on either end of the network. Now, why do we have terminating resistors in CAN bus, right?
You know, it's funny you mentioned that because of all the classes I've taken, it's not really mentioned in the detail I think it should be given, the merit it should be given. It's mentioned, but kind of jumped right over. And it's important people understand this, that
It's
we're talking
very
about electricity, signals being sent electronically, very high rate of speed. I mean, CAN itself being the language that it is, we are allowed to transmit messages anywhere from 500,000 all the way up to 1 million bits of information per second.
mhm.
And that speed alone can cause like
Well,
vibrations or noise
well,
and
exactly. So what
reflection.
everybody teaches, and I think you teach yourself, is think of the flow of electricity like the flow of water. And this is no difference here, right? So for those of us who have had older houses or houses, and I heard of something called water hammering. When you're running your faucet and then you just slam it shut and you hear your pipes bang in the background, that's called water hammering. Now, what's supposed to be in your house is they call it a water hammer arrestor. All it is a piece of pipe at the outlet that's filled with air, and its only job is to when you slam your faucet shut, it acts like a shock absorber, so it
like a
doesn't bang the pipes around.
like a dampener on a fuel rail.
It's exactly what it is, right? Because when you have reflecting voltages bounce off and come back, which is exactly what happens because electricity flows just like water. You will actually add voltage into a system. And that's how you can change binary data, ones and zeros. You can change a one into a zero into a one. That's how you get communicate. That's how you can get communication codes. You can actually change your bits of data. All right.
People,
So that's why we have these shock absorbers at the end of the CAN bus to absorb that information going back and forth.
and someone has said to me before, why is it always 120 ohms? Like if I'm looking at a Mercedes Benz or I'm looking at a Honda or I'm looking at a Ford, it's not the type of vehicle it's CAN itself is a language. When something
Mm-hmm.
speaks high speed CAN, it has to speak at a certain speed. That's part of the rules. And
Yeah.
it's the speed and the media, the copper wiring that we use and the speed in which that data is transmitted that dictates how much, how big of a shock absorber, if you will, that Chris
Mm-hmm.
describes it as that we need. And
Yep.
and that's where the
Now,
120 ohms comes from due to the speed.
exactly. So you got to have 120 ohms of total resistance. Now, why do I say total resistance? We're getting into the weeds here, but there are some vehicles, you see this in a lot of European vehicles, that'll actually not have two terminating resistors. Each module will have its own terminating resistance that all adds up to the 60 ohms. This way you can lose a module and it'll still be okay. We're getting way into the weeds, but this particular vehicle should have one on one end, one on the other end. So going back to what we're talking about, I see at the TIPM at connector 1 and connector 7, I'm able to split my network in half and test it,
Mhm.
right? So then I flip the TIPM up and I pull these two out, right? And I can see go back one more slide. So I'm looking at pins on connector 7, pins 28 and 29, and then connector 1, pins 15 and 16, which is another good thing to know about CAN bus and diagrams. In general rule of thumb, when the CAN wires go through a connector, they're usually right next to each other, either right across or the next pin's in there, which is just another cool little trivia. So I pull those connectors off, right? And I check, which is basically what we're seeing right here. We're seeing my network being split into two, right? I can
Mhm.
see that if I check connector 7, 120 ohms, right?
So if you pull this connector off of
Yep.
here
Mm-hmm.
and you put your test, your DVOM, right? You're not using a scope, are you?
I'm not haven't gotten to a scope yet.
Oh, so you're this connector is disconnected from this TIPM,
Disconnected from the vehicle,
and
and
you've
the
got
key is
your
turned off. That is key. You got to have the key out. You got to have the key out of the car.
understood. And from here to here, disconnected through here, you are measuring a resistance value of 120 ohms.
Exactly. Now the other side, connector one, I'm reading 2,500 ohms through all
Oh,
those
that
things.
sounds strange.
It sounds a little off. All right. I was expecting what like if I see 120 on one side, I'm expected to see 120 on the other side because that's a complete network,
Me too.
right?
That's where my mind went.
Exactly. So what does this also tell me? This also tells me that if we go to the next slide, it tells me that all these modules on this side on connector one are good. I don't have to worry about those because I'm reading 120 ohms of resistance there
Connector 7.
through connector seven. I'm not worried
Yeah.
about that, which then leaves me with connector one is my issue, right?
So the fact that this is 120, I'm with you. We don't have a resistance issue. Our circuitry is intact,
Mm-hmm.
and it's probably not the cause of our problem. So the best part about diagnostics is people say, "Oh my God, there are 30 potential faults here. How do you know where to go?" The truth is, you don't know where to go. You don't know where to test. But what Chris is doing here, without getting dirty, he's figuring out what is good on the vehicle. That's one less thing, or in this case, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven different things he does not have to test.
Yep. One of the biggest things I say is our job as diagnosticians is to take as many question marks off the board as possible. And I
Well
just
said.
took off with one test 7 things off the board. With one more test, what I also did is the pins to the TIPM at connector one, right? I hooked into there, reconnected pin number 7, or connector number 7. So I tested through my TIPM to the other side and had my same 120 ohms, which also means that my TIPM is good.
So you plug this in, right?
I plugged connector 7 in.
Seven, sorry, connector
Yep.
seven in.
Left
So
connector
all
one
of these
on.
nodes are connected to this net to the
Exactly.
TIPM.
Yep. And
And
then
then you
connected
stuck your
the pins at the TIPM.
yep, you touched your test leads to 15 and 16 with this
Yep.
disconnected, right?
Correct. With that disconnected.
So
And I had
you're
my same
basically touching the
120 ohms.
computer. Gotcha. So
Exactly.
that proves this is all connected through here,
Yep.
basically proving everything from my arrow to the right is good.
Exactly.
Right?
All that is
Okay.
good. It's leaving
But
us from a
some are
giant
down.
question mark to 2 things that could be bad.
Bing, or that
Yep. So let's
powertrain
move on.
control module or drivetrain control module.
Exactly.
I'm
So
with
let's
you.
move on to the next slide. So I know those are good. So again, what does that tell us? All right. Tells us that everything connected to the connector number 7 is awesome. My TIPM is also functioning. It's all good. Also noticed by the original code scan and module view that my TIPM had was communicating. And also, again, I cannot emphasize how greasy and gross this truck was. I don't want to go nuts with this thing. All right. So all that left, I go from 10 questions to 2 questions. I have two
That's a heck of
modules
a
and
lot of
questions
time
in there.
savings.
Exactly. By 2 questions. So now I want to go. So I'm only looking at these 2 problems: my powertrain control module, which we call the ECM here. I use them interchangeably, and my drivetrain control module. Right.
So
Those
it's
are
one of
two
these.
things that could be one. It's one of those that have to be the problem. All right. So let's go to the next slide. So now I pull up service information. All right. This is in factory service information. And if you dig in all data, if you go to information bus and description and operation, this will be here. All right. And I highlighted the important bits that we want to talk about. And it says here on the CAN-C or IHS bus, a dominant node has 120 ohm termination resistance, while a non-dominant or recessive node has 2,500 to 3,000 ohms of termination
Oh,
resistance.
those numbers sound familiar.
Keep those numbers in mind. Now, I copied the paragraph down, but again, the next sentence also reads, the dominant nodes on the CAN-C bus are the WIN and the powertrain control module, engine control module. All right. Those 2 bits of information are key. All right. So the WIN lives on my C7 side right there. That's fine. I'm not worried about the win. I'm only worried about the powertrain control module, engine, the ECM. So let's go back to, I think, 2 diagrams down, right there. So I'm only worried about the powertrain control module. That should be reading 120 ohms. Also, my ohm reading was 2,500 at that connector. 2,500, if we look at service information, go forward one more slide. Our non-dominant nodes are 2,500 to 3,000 ohms, all right? So the other node that's there is the drivetrain control module. So I'm reading 3,000 ohms from that. So that also means that's fine because I'm reading 2,500 ohms, which the only thing that could be wrong is my wires to my PCM are cut to my C7 connector, or my internal terminating resistor at the PCM is bad.
So I love your logic.
Huh?
I love your logic. Let me retrace. Step 1, you eliminated connector 7, which housed those other 7 or 8 nodes by logic alone, 120 by one test, which led you to the problem on this side of the system. The fact that you had 2,500 ohms, service information told you 2,500 was normal for non-dominant control units. You were able to eliminate this because since you have 2,500, that's normal. However, at the same time, it also proves that the powertrain control module couldn't be intact because that should yield us 120.
Sure. Yeah, it does. This test doesn't prove quite yet that what it is, but it proves what it's not. Yeah. And it is not the drivetrain control module. So the only things it could be is, you see where that S167 is, that splice 167? Yep. I am good all the way to there. So it's either I have a break in the wires after that splice S167, or my internal resistor is bad. So all I need to do is pull that connector 2 out of my PCM, check pins 35 and 18, right? Check pins 35 and 18 for continuity, and they're good, right?
That's right here, 35 and 18. There we go.
Right. Remember how I was talking how the wires are laid out either next to one, like next to the line, or right side to side on a connector. Yep. These ones are side to side on a connector. Gotcha. All right. So I own that to my TIPM, and it's good. So the only thing that could be wrong with this car is that the internal terminating resistor in the ECM is bad.
Very good. Good to know. Right? So all of I love it. Again, you're not really even, I'll say, working on the car. You're at the steering column. That's it.
Yeah. Well, I did the couple testing of the fender of the car at the TIPM, but I mean, I'm not diving into anything, taking stuff apart, taking logos out. I don't want to.
Put it this way: the typical complaint we get from gas guys is, "Now I got to work on this diesel." This isn't a diesel problem. This has nothing to do with the fact it could be a hydrogen car. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
but people.
Yeah, I tell people I don't diesel. I do not diesel. I hate working on diesel. I hate them so much.
You know what? People who don't work on diesel, what usually happens in my experience is this. Like you, I don't like diesel. I don't work on them. Why? Because I'm not equipped. Okay, why don't you get equipped? Well, I don't get equipped because I don't work on. So it just keeps going. I don't work on them because I don't have the tools, and I don't have the tools because
it's a laws of attraction, Brandon.
Just keep going around and around.
If I don't buy a diesel fuel pressure gauge, then I don't have to work on them. So again, we're summarizing, right? Let's go back to the next slide. We got to talk about Highlander for a second here. So again, it leaves us, there can only be one problem, just like Highlander. Again, according to Ricky Bobby, best movie ever made. It won the Oscar for best movie ever. All right. We learned that the drivetrain control module is a non-dominant module, 2,500 ohms. Our ECM powertrain control module is the dominant module. I read 2,500. The only thing it could be is a faulty PCM, right? So now we make a decision. Now, most techs, they'll stop here, right? Like, okay, you called it. And you'd still be right. You're good to go. But I've been burned before, right? Yeah. And again, as a diagnostician, our job is to take as many question marks off the board as possible. But also, a sub also is you want to have as many fingers pointing to a problem as possible. So if I can do something else to further prove that this PCM is no good, what can I do? Right. So what I would like to do, if you go to the next slide,
I will. Can I throw in something real quick?
please throw in something.
Give you the perfect visualization. Chris just said it. You would probably be right, but fill in the blank. Here's what happened to me. I was working on a Cadillac. It was a simple problem. The seat heater didn't work. As usual, the seat heater went open from friction, people getting in and out of the car. I checked for continuity. It was clear as day. It was open. I condemn this as bad seat heater elements, which, we had to order the parts. Here's where I could have taken this further, like you were suggesting. It also had an open circuit, had a blown fuse.
Oh,
So when I put the seat heaters in and it didn't fix it, this was no big deal. I just had to troubleshoot it further, though. It also had an open fuse. Had I done something to bypass this, prove the fault before fixing it, I could have saved myself some time and
yeah.
maybe some embarrassment.
And plus that sinking feeling when you plug in a part and it doesn't work. Oh,
Yes,
oh, the
that's
the scrambling to find a problem doesn't change no matter how good you get. So what I want to do is, again, I'm trying to use what I know to figure out the problem even further. So what I do know is I seem to be missing a 120 ohm resistor in this circuit, right? So what I want to use is my AES Wave U-Test terminal kit. Links
a
in the
great kit.
description. Links in the description. This thing is great. Each one of my techs has one of these in the shop. All right, because it is fundamental. You need this. All right. In this kit is some really cool stuff. And again, it sounds like a plug, but this if you don't have it, you need to get it. Up top, you see a bunch of front probes, and these are the correct size front probes for 98% of the connectors that you'll see. You have fuse loops. You have the ability to make your own connectors. You have your adjustable resistor, which is great for simulating sensors. What you also have is an airbag simulator. All right. And all this airbag simulator is a Y connector with a 2.2 ohm resistor that you put in there. But what I want to do is I could take that 2.2 ohm resistor out, and I keep in stock a bag full of 120 ohm resistors for stuff just like this. So I plug in my 120 ohm resistor, and I go in and I pierce in to my CAN wires off of that connector 1. I add in my 120 ohm resistor, right? And I also put my meter inside just so I can read the resistance. And if you go to the next slide,
I love that.
you go in and you see I'm now reading 54.8, effectively 60 ohms of resistance. All right. And now I have what should be a pretty complete network. All right. And what I wanted to do is I will hook up WiTech again, and I can see a lot more yellow where red was. Right. And I could see that I could see my win talking again, my WCM or my win talking in, my TIPM or TIPM, the tire pressure control module, drivetrain control module, occupant restraint module, ABS, all the important stuff talking. Again, my PCM is not talking because it's bad. I still have it connected, but it's not talking. The car will not start because it needs a PCM to start. But this proves that restoring the resistance in my network brings my network back to life, and things can actually talk now. All right.
I love that.
It's so this test. I mean, it's I used to for those of you who know Keith DeFazio, really smart dude. He taught me this test, and for the longest time I didn't understand it. I saw him do it on some videos of doing this exact kind of thing, restoring the resistance to a network. I went on the road with him a couple times, saw him do this test. I saw that it worked. I just didn't really it didn't click why it worked until really I got to this job, into this particular problem where I had an incomplete network and I needed to see if that was my problem. It's a really cool test to do. And these resistors I got for $20, I got like 1,000 resistors. they're really cheap to get. And it's a really good thing to have in your diagnostic toolbox.
The takeaway for me so far is if I'm a technician, an unknowing technician watching over your shoulder, you didn't perform some kind of bypass test and magically the car cranked over. That's one thing, right? Proof's in the pudding. But basically, the car still has the same. You did a test, you bypass things, and technically the car still doesn't start.
Hmm.
So from the outside looking in, it's like, well, how can you be so sure? But when you look at the information that you were viewing, you saw the change. You made a change and reevaluated the test results, and
Hmm.
the change was clear as crystal. So as far as I'm concerned, you found your problem, and the car isn't even fixed yet, but we know it's going to be fixed when you're done.
Exactly. I'm not worried. I'm not
Mm-mm.
worried. When the shop decides to buy this really expensive control module and I go to program it, I know it's going to work. And because again, I saw the problem, and then again using it's actually the scientific method, right? You have a hypothesis, and then you perform a test to confirm your hypothesis, right? I hypothesized that the ECM was no good. I wanted to perform a test, an experiment to prove that this ECM was no good. So I added in the
Yep.
resistance that I assumed or hypothesized that was missing, and it brought the network back online, which
Mm-hmm.
was enough for me to make my conclusion, and I'm good to
Beautiful.
go.
We are in fact scientists. I say that all the time, and I know we didn't sign up to be scientists, but we are. And if we follow that scientific process, what seems very difficult might just be intricate. You know, there's no doubt these cars are getting more and more complex, and we're squeezing more and more stuff into a smaller area. But think about what we're trying to accomplish. All the creature comforts that the drivers or the passengers of the vehicle desire, the stringent noose tightening effect that the government has on the automakers for being compliant with tailpipe emission standards and maximizing fuel mileage, um, while maintaining, if not improving performance, vehicle performance for power, horsepower, and torque output. That's a heck of a lot to ask. And doing that with smaller and smaller engines, we're extracting V8 power from six cylinders and V6 power from four cylinders, and so on and so forth. Um, we're squeezing every last drop of energy out of these small power plants, and to accomplish that in itself is no easy feat. But we need to keep up with technology and to pursue things, as I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, Chris, to pursue things in a fashion that yields us some conclusive answers is one thing, being accurate, but to do it efficiently is another. And I think when I always say this, when you have accuracy and efficiency, you get confidence. And if there's anything I want for any of you, it's confidence. I want you to go to work confident, because when you're confident, you have a better day at work. And to me, it means a heck of a lot more than money. I mean, money isn't everything. We need it, but I would not want all the money in the world if that meant I was stressed out and miserable. And that's my truth.
Yep. But yeah, this was a fun one. Again, I thank you for letting me share this. It's just, and when I called you after I made my conclusions, and I called you all excited. I remember I just sent you a link to go check stuff out because I was so excited. Because again, it's a test that people need to know, and not to use it, but it's something that, like, if you can add that to your toolbox, and it's something simple. Just if people can learn the simple little thing, it's just really cool. I wanted to share that with people, and thank you.
No, as always, my friend, I appreciate your expertise, but what I like about you is how you discuss things, how you keep it so real world. You don't stand up there and present things in a fashion that make people feel intimidated or scared. You give me confidence when I watch you talk. You make me feel like I can do it, and I know others get the same feeling. So I appreciate what you have to offer, buddy. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Brandon.
Course, and keep them coming, because all the good stuff you encounter, it's very important, and I love sharing it, and others do too. So um, I thank you very much, guys, ladies, gentlemen. I appreciate you for joining myself and my good buddy Chris Martino from ADAS LI, Long
That's
Island,
it.
New York,
Long
and
Island.
Long Island. We will see you next time for the next episode of Wrench Tales. Take care.
Thank
Thanks
you.
again, Chris.